Waking up from a coma, I found no family, just a scrawled note from my father saying they had stopped paying. He thought he was cutting costs, but he actually signed his own professional death warrant. That ruthless signature did not just abandon me, it unknowingly activated a dormant trust fund worth $850 million. They left me to die, but they accidentally handed me the weapon to destroy them. My name is Nicole Hudson. And the first thing I realized when I clawed my way back from the darkness was that I was expensive. The second thing I realized was that the people who were supposed to love me had decided I was no longer worth the cost. The waking up part wasn't like in the movies. There was no sudden gasp for air, no dramatic sitting up with sweat beading on my forehead. It was a slow, agonizing drag through sludge. My eyelids felt like they were weighted down with lead, and my throat was so dry it felt like I had swallowed a handful of sand. The only sound in the room was the rhythmic, indifferent beep of a cardiac monitor and the aggressive hum of an industrial air conditioner that seemed determined to freeze the marrow in my bones. I was in a hospital room in Chicago. I knew that much from the skyline visible through the sliver of window where the blinds hadn't been fully closed. The gray winter light filtered in, casting long, depressing shadows across the linoleum floor. My body was a map of dull aches and sharp, stabbing pains, particularly around my ribs. The memory of the accident was a fractured mosaic, headlights blinding me on a rainy highway, the screech of tires, the terrifying weightlessness as the car flipped, and then nothing but a void. I tried to turn my head. The movement sent a spike of agony down my neck, but I forced myself to look at the chair beside the bed. That was the designated spot, wasn't it? That was where the vigil keeper sat. That was where you found the worried father, holding a crumpled paper cup of cold coffee, or the protective older brother, dozing uncomfortably with his coat used as a blanket. The chair was empty. It wasn't just empty, it was pristine. The vinyl cushion had no indentations. There were no flowers on the bedside table, no get-well-soon balloons bobbing against the ceiling, no stack of magazines brought from home to pass the time. There wasn't even a jacket thrown over the back of the chair. The room was sterile, devoid of any personal touch, stripped of any evidence that the person lying in the bed mattered to anyone in the outside world. I was alone. My gaze drifted to the rolling stainless steel tray table pushed haphazardly near my hip. There was a plastic pitcher of water, a small plastic cup, and a piece of paper. It wasn't a card. It was a sheet of generic hospital memo paper, folded once, sharp and precise. I managed to free my hand from the sheets. My fingers trembled uncontrollably, weak from atrophy. As I reached for the paper, it felt heavy, heavier than paper should feel. I unfolded it. I recognized the handwriting immediately. It was jagged, vertical, and rushed. It was the handwriting of a man who signed million-dollar contracts in 3 seconds flat and checked his watch while doing it. It was the handwriting of my father, Graham Hudson. There was no "Dearest Nicole." There was no "We are praying for you." There were just 5 words, scrawled in black ink that looked like it had been pressed down hard enough to tear the fibers of the paper. "We stopped paying. Good luck." I stared at the words. I read them once, twice, 3 times. The sentence didn't make sense. It was a syntax I couldn't process. We stopped paying. It sounded like a subscription cancellation. It sounded like a memo regarding a redundant software license or a lease on a warehouse that was no longer generating revenue. The door to my room hissed open. I didn't look up. I couldn't tear my eyes away from the note. A nurse bustled in, checking a chart. She paused when she saw my eyes were open. She was a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, but a weary set to her shoulders. She didn't look surprised to see me awake. She looked relieved, but also strangely pitying. "You're back with us," she said softly, moving to check the IV drip. "Don't try to move too much, honey. You have been under for a long time." "How long?" My voice was a cracked whisper, a sound I barely recognized. "Over 2 months," she said, her fingers busy with the tubes. "You came in here in late October. It is January now. 2 months. I had lost 2 months of my life." "Where are they?" I rasped, holding up the note with a shaking hand. The nurse's expression tightened. She stopped fiddling with the IV and looked at me, and in her hesitation, I saw the confirmation of my worst fears. She looked at the note, then at me, and sighed. It was a professional sigh, the kind used to deliver bad news without getting sued. "Your father and a woman, your stepmother, I assume, were here about 2 weeks ago," she said, choosing her words with careful precision. "They met with the hospital administration. There was a dispute regarding the long-term prognosis. The doctors were optimistic you would wake up, but your family felt the expenses were becoming unsustainable given the uncertainty." "Unsustainable," I repeated. The word tasted like bile. Graham Hudson was worth millions. The company, Hudson Vertex, had posted record profits last quarter. I had built the data architecture that secured those profits. "They terminated the private billing authorization and your insurance coverage was removed from the primary policy," the nurse continued, her voice lowering as if she were sharing a shameful secret. "The administration has been trying to contact them for 10 days to arrange a transfer, but calls are not being returned. The hospital is currently preparing paperwork to move you to a state-run long-term care facility. We were literally discussing the transport logistics for tomorrow morning." I closed my eyes, the paper crinkling in my fist. Good luck. That was it. That was the sign-off. I wasn't a daughter who had miraculously survived a car crash. I was a line item that had exceeded its budget variance. I was a project that had dragged on too long without a deliverable, so management had pulled the plug. The physical pain in my ribs was agonizing, but it was nothing compared to the cold, hollow sensation spreading through my chest. It felt like someone had reached inside and scooped out everything that made me human, leaving only a void where a family should have been. I found myself drifting back, against my will, to a memory from 25 years ago. I was 6 years old. We were living in the old house in Cleveland. Before the penthouses and the private jets, a blizzard had buried the driveway. I had run out into the snow without my boots, chasing a stray cat, and I had fallen. I remembered the cold biting into my skin, the panic, and then I remembered strong arms scooping me up. Graham Hudson had run out in his socks, picked me up, and wrapped me inside his wool coat. He had carried me inside, rubbing my frozen feet, promising me he wouldn't let the cold get me. That man died the day my mother, Laura, died. When cancer took Mom, it took the warmth out of the house. Graham didn't mourn. He calcified. He became a creature of metrics, stock prices, and efficiency. He replaced a wife with a trophy, Evelyn, a woman whose smile was as practiced and synthetic as the filters she used on her social media photos. The silence in our house changed. Before, silence meant peace. After Evelyn arrived, silence became a weapon. If I spoke too loudly, or if I didn't look perfect, or if I had an opinion, Evelyn wouldn't yell. She would just stop existing in my direction. She would turn her head in the middle of my sentence and ask someone to pass the salt. She taught my older brother, Mason, to do the same. Mason, my brother, the golden boy, he learned quickly that to survive in the new regime, you had to align with the power. He treated me not with hate, but with a terrifying indifference. I became invisible. I became a ghost in my own home long before I ended up in this hospital bed. And now, they had formalized it. They hadn't just ignored me at the dinner table. They had left me to rot in a hospital room, gambling that I would never wake up to call them out on it. Or perhaps they just didn't care if I did. We stopped paying. It was the ultimate transactional rejection. A sudden sound at the door snapped me out of the spiral. The latch clicked, and the heavy door swung open. My heart gave a pathetic, hopeful flutter. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe Graham was walking in now to explain that it was an administrative error, that the note was a misunderstanding. But it wasn't Graham, and it wasn't Mason. 2 men walked into the room. The first one I recognized instantly, and the sight of him sent a shockwave of confused nostalgia through me. It was Owen Blake. He looked older than I remembered. His hair was completely gray now, and he walked with a slight limp, but he still wore the same kind of rumpled tweed jacket he used to wear when he came to the house to help Mom with her projects. Owen had been Mom's personal attorney, her confidant, the one person Graham tolerated but never liked. I hadn't seen him in 10 years. The second man was a stranger. He was a stark contrast to Owen. He was younger, perhaps in his late 30s or early 40s. He wore a black suit that was tailored with surgical precision, fitting him like armor. He didn't look like a visitor. He looked like an event. He had dark hair and eyes that swept the room with the efficiency of a scanner, taking in the empty chair, the cheap tray, the lack of flowers, and finally, me. There was no pity in his eyes. When he looked at me, he didn't see a broken victim in a hospital gown. He looked at me with a sharp, assessing intensity, like a general inspecting a soldier who had just crawled out of a trench. It was an intimidating look, but after the indifferent cruelty of my father's note, it felt strangely grounding. This man saw me. Owen moved to the side of the bed, his face etched with a mixture of relief and urgent concern. "Nicole," he breathed, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank God. We were tracking the vitals remotely, but we couldn't be sure until we saw you open your eyes." "Owen?" I whispered, my brain struggling to catch up. "Why are you here? How did you know?" Owen didn't answer immediately. He looked at the stranger. The man in the black suit stepped forward. He moved with a quiet, predatory grace. He stopped at the foot of my bed, resting his hands on the rail. He glanced at the note still clutched in my hand, Graham's final insult, and a flicker of something dark and satisfied passed over his face. "Your father thinks he just cut a liability," the stranger said. His voice was deep, calm, and utterly devoid of warmth. "He has no idea. He just pulled the pin on a grenade." I stared at him, bewildered. "Who are you?" He didn't offer a smile. He didn't offer a platitude. He leaned in slightly, his gaze locking onto mine, demanding complete focus. "My name is Damon Reed," he said, "and we do not have much time. Nicole, you have about 72 hours before your family legally erases you from existence. But if you can sit up and listen to what we have to say, you are going to own them." The air in the room seemed to shift. The despair that had been crushing my chest a moment ago began to recede, replaced by a spark of adrenaline. The beep of the monitor seemed to speed up, matching the sudden, hard thud of my heart. I wasn't just a discarded daughter anymore. I didn't know what was happening, but looking at the cold fire in Damon Reed's eyes, I knew one thing for certain. The mourning period was over. The silence in the hospital room was heavy, but it was a familiar weight. It pressed against my eardrums with the same suffocating density I had lived with for over a decade. Looking at Owen standing there, looking older and more worn than the image I held in my memory, I felt the timeline of my life fold back on itself, to understand why I was lying in a bed with a cancellation notice from my father. I had to look back to the moment the Hudson family actually died. It wasn't the car crash 2 months ago. It was the day my mother took her last breath. I was 18 years old when Laura Hudson died of cancer. The funeral was a grand, tasteful affair, exactly the kind of event my father, Graham, excelled at managing. He looked devastatingly handsome in his grief, accepting condolences with a stoic grace that made the business pages fawn over his resilience. But looking back, I realize he wasn't mourning a wife. He was managing a transition of assets. It took exactly 1 year for the replacement to arrive. Evelyn didn't move in. She was installed. She was a woman curated for the Instagram age before Instagram was even fully dominant. She had the kind of polished, symmetrical beauty that felt aggressive in its perfection. Graham introduced her as a new chapter for our family. She was the model new mother, a phrase that tasted like ash in my mouth. The violence of her presence wasn't physical. Evelyn never raised a hand to me. She never screamed. She mastered a far more efficient form of cruelty. She simply decided I did not exist. Dinner became a nightly ritual of erasure. We would sit at the long mahogany table, Graham at the head, Evelyn to his right, Mason to his left, and me at the far end, exiled by distance and decorum. If I spoke, Evelyn wouldn't interrupt. She would wait for me to finish, pause for a heartbeat to let my words die in the air, and then turn her radiant smile to Mason or Graham. "Did you see the article about the merger in the journal today, darling?" she would ask Graham, her voice smooth as silk, completely bypassing the fact that I had just asked to pass the water or mentioned my college grades. It was a masterclass in psychological warfare. She taught the men in the house that acknowledging Nicole was a breach of etiquette, and they learned, God, they learned fast. Mason was the quickest study. My brother, who used to sneak into my room to play video games when we were kids, transformed before my eyes. He became the golden boy. He was the heir apparent, the crown prince of Hudson Vertex. By the time he was 25, he was on the cover of Forbes under headlines like "The Young Strategic Brain." He stood next to Graham in photo shoots, both of them wearing matching bespoke suits, arms crossed, looking like titans of industry. But while Mason was being groomed for the magazine covers, I was being groomed for the shadows. After I graduated with honors in computer science, a degree Graham paid for with a dismissive wave of a checkbook, never once attending a ceremony, I asked for a job at the company. I didn't ask for a handout. I asked for an entry-level position. "We need you to learn from the ground up, Nicole," Graham had said, not looking up from his tablet. "No nepotism. You start where there is space." The space was a converted storage room in the basement of the old headquarters. It had no windows. The ventilation system rattled like a dying engine, and the overhead fluorescent light had a flicker that could induce a seizure. My desk was a scratched laminate table scavenged from a defunct call center, and my chair had a wheel that stuck, dragging a black streak across the linoleum every time I moved. This was where they put me, but this was also where I became dangerous. While Mason was upstairs drinking single malt scotch and memorizing buzzwords for press releases, I was rewriting the entire digital infrastructure of Hudson Vertex. I built the data architecture that allowed the company to scale its logistics by 300% in 2 years. I coded the proprietary security protocols that won us the massive government contracts that Graham boasted about at shareholder meetings. I worked 18-hour days. I slept under that scratch desk. I drank terrible coffee and wrote code that was elegant, airtight, and revolutionary. And every single time a project launched, I watched the live stream from my basement purgatory. I watched Mason walk onto the stage, bathed in applause and spotlights. I watched him point to the giant screens displaying my algorithms, my interfaces, my logic, and say, "I envisioned a system that could think, and today, I am proud to present it." He never understood how it worked. If someone asked him a technical question, he would deflect with corporate jargon about synergy and holistic integration. I was the one in the earpiece of the technical director, feeding the answers that made Mason look like a genius. I told myself it was fine. I told myself that the work mattered more than the credit. I told myself that if I just made myself indispensable, eventually, Graham would have to see me. I thought I was proving my worth. I didn't realize I was just increasing my value as a utility, like a high-speed server or a backup generator. The erasure became administrative. Slowly, my name started dropping off the emails. First, I was moved to the BCC line. Then, I was removed entirely. My reports were rebranded with the header, Office of the Chief Strategy Officer, Mason's title. I became a ghost in the machine I had built. I was the architect of their fortune, and they didn't even give me a key to the front door. Lying in that hospital bed in Chicago, the pieces of the past began to reassemble into a horrifying picture, but one memory surfaced with a clarity that made my breath catch. It was a week before Mom died. The house was quiet, that heavy, morphine-dampened quiet of impending death. I had walked into her study late at night. She was sitting at her desk, wrapped in a thick shawl, shivering despite the heat being cranked up. She wasn't resting, she was working. There were stacks of papers everywhere, not medical bills, but legal documents, thick, dense binders, and sitting right next to her hand was a small, heavy steel safe. She had looked up at me, her eyes sunken but burning with a fierce, terrifying lucidity. She didn't look like a dying woman in that moment. She looked like a general preparing for a war she wouldn't live to fight. "Nicole," she had whispered, her voice a dry rasp. "Come here." I knelt beside her chair. She grabbed my hand, her grip surprisingly strong, her fingernails digging into my skin. "They are going to try to erase you," she said. It wasn't a warning. It was a statement of fact. Graham loves the idea of family, but he loves control more. And that woman, she is a vacuum. She will suck the air out of the room until you suffocate. "Mom, don't," I had cried, trying to soothe her. "Rest." "No," she snapped, shaking my hand. "Listen to me. Don't let them shrink you. You have a mind like a diamond, Nicole, but diamonds are just rocks unless they cut. When the time comes, you have to be sharper than all of them." She turned back to the desk and finished signing a document. She folded it, sealed it in a thick cream-colored envelope, and wrote a name on the front. Owen Blake. Then she opened the small safe. Inside, I saw a flash of hard drives and more envelopes. She placed the document inside, locked it, and spun the dial. "I have set a timer on the world, Nicole," she had said, leaning back, exhausted. "Owen knows. He is the only one who knows. Graham thinks I am just organizing the estate. He thinks I am weak." A small, bitter smile touched her lips. "Let them think you are weak, too, until you aren't." At the time, I thought it was the fever talking. I thought the safe contained jewelry or maybe personal letters. I thought Owen knows meant he knew about her funeral wishes. I was young, grieving, and naive. I trusted that my father would take care of me. I looked up from my hospital bed, past the pain in my ribs, and locked eyes with Owen Blake. He was standing there with the same grim determination I had seen on my mother's face that night, and next to him was Damon Reed, a man who looked like he could dismantle a corporation with a single phone call. The connections fired in my brain, faster than any code I had ever written. The safe, the envelopes, the secret meetings my mother must have had while Graham was busy courting his new life. The fact that Owen was here, now, exactly when Graham had made his move to cut me off. "She knew," I whispered, the realization hitting me with the force of a physical blow. "She didn't just die. She prepared." Damon Reed nodded slowly. He didn't look surprised that I'd put it together. If anything, he looked approving. "Your mother was the smartest person in any room she entered," Damon said, his voice low. "She knew that one day, your father's greed would outweigh his obligation to you. She knew he would try to discard you. So, she built a trap door, and she spent the last year of her life piling gold underneath it." I looked at the stopped-paying note again. It wasn't a tragedy anymore. It was the trigger. Graham thought he was ending a burden. He didn't know he had just signed the authorization for his own destruction. "The game was rigged 10 years ago. Nicole," Owen said softly, stepping closer. "Laura placed the pieces. She just needed you to wake up to play the final move." I wasn't the victim of a car accident. I wasn't the dismissed daughter of a billionaire. I was the sleeper agent in my own life, and my activation code had just been punched in. "Tell me," I said, my voice steady for the first time in months. "Tell me everything she did." Owen pulled a chair close to the bed, the metal legs scraping harshly against the linoleum floor. He placed his leather briefcase on his lap and snapped the brass locks open. The sound was like 2 gunshots in the quiet room. He didn't look at me with the soft pity of an old family friend anymore. He looked like a lawyer preparing to lay out the evidence of a capital crime. He pulled out a document, thick and stapled, and slid it onto the rolling tray, right next to the plastic pitcher of water. "You need to see this," Owen said, his voice tight. "This was filed with the Cook County Circuit Court less than 24 hours ago." I shifted painfully, my ribs protesting, and looked at the cover page. The legal jargon was dense, but the title was bold and unmistakable. Petition for Guardianship and Declaration of Permanent Incapacity. The petitioner was Graham Hudson. I felt the blood drain from my face, leaving me cold and dizzy. He wants to declare me incompetent? Not just incompetent, Owen corrected, tapping the paper. Permanently incapacitated. The filing claims that due to the severity of your neurological trauma, you are in a persistent vegetative state with no likelihood of recovery. He is asking the court to grant him full, unilateral power of attorney over your person and your estate to manage your affairs while you are, and I quote, indefinitely absent. But I am awake, I said, my voice rising in panic. I am right here. I am talking to you. He does not know that, Damon Reed interjected. He was leaning against the wall, arms crossed, watching me with that same intense, calculating gaze. And he does not want to know that. This isn't about your health, Nicole. It is about your signature, or rather, the lack of it. Hudson Vertex is undergoing a massive restructuring, Owen explained, flipping a page to show a timeline. Graham is trying to merge the company with a foreign equity firm to cover some significant losses from bad investments he and Mason made last year. But because the original corporate charter, the one your mother helped write, requires a unanimous vote from all Class A shareholders for a merger of this size, he is stuck. I am a Class A shareholder. I realized. I hold the 5% of stock Mom left me directly. Exactly, Owen said. He needs your vote, since you wouldn't give it to him willingly, and since you were conveniently in a coma, he decided to legally erase your ability to say no. If the court grants this petition, he becomes your voice. He votes for you. The merger goes through, and he cashes out. It was a suffocation. That was the only word for it. My father hadn't just abandoned me to save money on hospital bills. He was trying to bury me alive legally so he could sell off the company I helped build. He wanted me to be a vegetable because a vegetable couldn't object to being robbed. He thinks he has won, Damon said, pushing off the wall and walking toward the bed. He thinks you are a loose end that he has successfully tied off. He assumes you will never wake up fast enough to contest the filing. Damon paused, and for the first time, a small, terrifyingly cold smile touched his lips. But arrogance makes people sloppy, Damon continued. Graham was so focused on cutting costs and seizing control that he made a fatal error. He stopped paying the bills. I don't understand, I said, looking between them. What does the hospital bill have to do with the voting rights? Owen reached back into his briefcase. This time, he didn't pull out a crisp new legal filing. He pulled out a thin manila folder that looked old. The edges were soft and worn, and the label was typed on a typewriter, not printed. Hudson Legacy Trust. He placed it gently over the incapacity petition, covering Graham's lies with something that felt heavy with history. 10 years ago, your mother didn't just write a will, Owen said softly. She created a shadow trust, a fail-safe mechanism. She knew Graham better than anyone. She knew that as long as you were useful to him, you were safe. But she terrified of what would happen if you ever became vulnerable. Owen opened the folder. The paper inside was yellowed parchment, signed in blue ink. I recognized the signature instantly, Laura Hudson, and below it, Owen Blake, trustee. Graham's signature was nowhere to be found. This trust holds the bulk of your mother's personal fortune, Owen said. Not the shared marital assets, but the money she made from her own patents before she married Graham, and the aggressive investments she made quietly over the years. She kept it entirely separate. Graham knows it exists, but he thinks it is a small rainy day fund, maybe a few $1 million locked away for your retirement. He is wrong, Damon said. Owen pointed to a paragraph in the middle of the second page. Read Clause 4B. I squinted at the text. In the event that the primary beneficiary is medically incapacitated and the legal guardian or next of kin formally ceases financial responsibility for said beneficiary's medical care, constituting an act of abandonment, the trust shall immediately and irrevocably fully vest. I stopped reading. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I looked at the crumpled note on my tray table, the note Graham had left. We stopped paying. It is a literal interpretation, Damon said, his voice crisp. The moment Graham signed the discharge refusal and left that note stating he was ceasing payment, He fulfilled the specific condition of Clause 4B. He formally abandoned his financial responsibility while you were incapacitated. That note, Owen said, pointing to the crumpled paper, is not just an insult, it is the golden evidence. It is the key that turns the lock. Turns the lock on what? I asked, my mouth dry. Damon reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a single sheet of paper, a financial summary. He laid it down on top of the yellowed trust document. Your mother was not just good at coding. Nicole, Damon said. She was an investment genius. She bought real estate in Silicon Valley in the 90s. She bought crypto before anyone knew what it was. She held shell companies that invested in the very competitors Graham was trying to crush. I looked at the number at the bottom of the page. I blinked, sure that the medication was making me hallucinate. I counted the commas. $850 million, I whispered. The number felt too big to fit in the room. 850 million, Damon confirmed. And it is not just cash, it includes hidden equity through shell corporations. The trust has been quietly buying up Hudson Vertex stock for a decade whenever the price dipped. Graham didn't notice because the purchases were small and fragmented. But when you aggregate them, you own the controlling interest, Owen finished. Combined with your existing 5%, the trust holds enough voting power to fire the board, to fire the CEO. I stared at the ceiling, trying to process the magnitude of the irony. Graham had tried to save a few $1,000s a month on my life support. In doing so, he had accidentally handed me an empire. So I own it? I asked, looking at Damon. Right now? Technically, yes, Damon said. The trigger was pulled the moment he stopped paying. The assets are yours. Graham is currently sitting in his office acting like the king, completely unaware that he is trespassing on your property. A surge of vindication rushed through me, hot and sharp. I wanted to laugh. I wanted to scream. I wanted to call Graham right now and hear the color drain from his voice. But, Owen said, and the heavy word dropped into the room like a stone. There is a problem. I looked at him, the high fading. What problem? The incapacity petition, Owen said, gesturing back to the first document. The hearing is scheduled for Friday morning. That is in 72 hours. If the judge bangs that gavel and declares you mentally incompetent before we can prove the trust has vested, everything freezes, Damon explained, his face serious. Graham will be appointed your guardian. He will legally gain control over your assets before you can claim them. We would have to sue to get them back, and that litigation could take years. By the time we win, he will have already merged the company and gutted the assets. He will argue that a woman in a coma cannot inherit or manage $850 million, Owen added. He will argue that the abandonment was a misunderstanding. If he gets that guardianship order, he invalidates your agency. The trust becomes a war zone instead of a weapon. The silence returned, but this time it was electric with tension. The beep of the monitor felt like a countdown. So I have to prove I am not a vegetable, I said. I have to show up. You have to do more than show up, Damon said. He walked to the window and looked out at the gray Chicago sky. Graham is planning to announce the restructuring at the Global Tech Summit in New York on Friday. The entire board will be there. The shareholders will be there. The press will be there. He turned back to me. If we send a lawyer to the court hearing in Chicago, Graham will spin it. He will say it is a legal trick. He will say you are being manipulated. But if you walk onto that stage in New York, Owen said, a glint of steel in his eyes. If you stand in front of the people he is trying to lie to, and you look him in the eye, he cannot spin that. You prove you are awake. You prove you are competent, and you drop the hammer on him in front of the entire world. 3 days, I said. I looked down at my body. My legs were weak. My ribs were broken. I hadn't walked in 2 months. I was wearing a hospital gown and I looked like a ghost. Can you do it? Damon asked. He wasn't asking if I was physically capable. He was asking if I had the will. Can you get out of this bed, get on a plane, and take back what is yours? Or do we let him win? I thought of the cold dinners. I thought of the basement office with no windows. I thought of Evelyn looking through me. I thought of Graham's handwriting on the note. Good luck. I reached out and grabbed the rail of the bed. My knuckles turned white. I gritted my teeth against the pain in my chest and pulled. It was agony, but I forced my torso up, inch by inch, until I was sitting upright, unsupported. I looked Damon Reed square in the eyes. "Get me a wheelchair," I said, "and get me a stylist. If I'm going to bury my father, I am going to look good doing it." Damon smiled. It was a shark's smile, sharp and terrifying. "We leave for New York tonight," he said. The transfer was executed with military precision. By midnight, I was no longer a patient in a public Chicago hospital. I was the occupant of a secure, anonymous suite in a private rehabilitation facility on the outskirts of the city. The room smelled of antiseptic and expensive leather. The windows were tinted. The door was reinforced. And on the sleek glass desk in front of me sat a high-performance laptop connected to a secure server node that Owen had set up. My ribs screamed in protest as I adjusted the brace around my torso, but the physical pain was becoming background noise. My mind was sharpening, focusing on the screen in front of me. "We are in," Damon said, standing behind my chair. "The tunnel is encrypted. To their IT department. This will look like standard background traffic from one of the regional server farms." I took a breath and typed in the URL for the Hudson Vertex internal dashboard. The login screen flickered to life. I didn't have my old credentials. They had undoubtedly been revoked the day I went into the coma. But I didn't need them yet. I just wanted to see the public face of the internal system. The dashboard loaded, and nausea that had nothing to do with my injuries rolled in my stomach. It was my architecture. I recognized the layout, the flow of the data streams, the specific way the security protocols handshake with the user. I had spent 3 years building this ecosystem in a windowless basement. But there, in bold sans serif font at the top right corner, was the credit line. System Architect, Mason Hudson. "He didn't just steal it," I muttered, scrolling down the project list. "He rebranded it." My project Alethea, and predictive AI for logistics, was now called Vertex Vision. The optimization algorithms I wrote to save fuel costs were now the Mason Protocol. It was a complete whitewash. They hadn't just fired me, they had peeled my skin off and worn it as a suit. "He does not know how any of this works," I said, my voice shaking with cold rage. "If the system throws a critical error, Mason wouldn't know if he should rewrite the kernel or reboot the router." "Then let's take a look under the hood," Damon said. He leaned over and typed a string of command line instructions into a separate terminal window. It wasn't standard code. It was a sequence that bypassed the user interface entirely, targeting the BIOS of the mainframe itself. The screen went black, then flashed with a single prompt: "Insert key." "This is where your mother comes in," Owen said. He reached into his jacket pocket and produced a small, heavy object. It wasn't a standard USB drive. It was a flat, brushed titanium card with a gold chip embedded in the center. It looked like a credit card made for a tank. "Laura gave me this 5 years ago," Owen said, his voice quiet. She said, "If Nicole is ever erased from the things that belong to her, give her the physical key." He handed it to me. It felt cold and substantial in my palm. I located the reader slot on the side of the specialized hardware Damon had brought and slid the card in. The screen exploded with data. Access granted. User, LH root. Level, Omni. "LH root," I whispered. "Laura Hudson root." My mother had created a super user account that sat above the CEO, above the CTO, above the entire board. It was a ghost key, invisible to standard system audits because it lived in the kernel of the operating system itself. "Look at the logs," Damon commanded. I began to type, my fingers remembering the rhythm despite the stiffness. I queried the version history of the core code. The screen filled with lines of text, scrolling faster than a normal person could read. But I saw exactly what I needed. "Here," I pointed, freezing the screen. "Look at the timestamps." The log showed a massive code commit dated 3 weeks ago, attributed to Mason. But when I expanded the metadata using the root access, The truth was laid bare. Mason's commit was just a file name change. The actual source code was linked to a user ID, NHDev01. He is literally copy-pasting my old repositories and putting his name on the commit header, I said, laughing humorlessly. He is too lazy to even obfuscate the code. He just changed the comments. Keep digging, Damon said. Look for the legal directives. I navigated to the legal department's restricted folder, a place no engineer was ever supposed to go. With the root access, the restricted banner simply dissolved. I found a folder marked Project Eclipse. I opened it. Inside were draft contracts and memos between Graham and a firm called Sovereign Apex Capital. I read the latest memo, dated 2 days ago. Subject: IP, Sanitization and Divestment. From Graham Hudson. Legal. Ensure all references to N. Hudson are scrubbed from the patent applications for the core logic module. We need a clean chain of title to close the sale with Sovereign. Once the incapacity order is granted on Friday, initiate the transfer of the core logic assets to the new holding company. Expected yield: $400 million. He is stripping the company. I realized, feeling a chill. He isn't just restructuring. He is selling the brain of the company, my code, to a foreign fund. He is going to hollow out Hudson Vertex, take the cash, and leave the shareholders with a shell. And he needs you incapacitated so you can't claim ownership of the IP before the sale closes, Owen added grimly. I was about to close the folder when I saw a file that didn't fit. It wasn't a document, it was a video file, labeled simply, For Nicole, MP4. My hand hovered over the trackpad. I looked at Owen. He nodded. I clicked play. A window opened. My mother's face filled the screen. She looked tired, thinner than I remembered from the good years, but her eyes were sharp. She was sitting in her study, the same room where she had given Owen the trust documents. Nicole, the video version of my mother said. Her voice was clear, cutting through the years of silence. If you are seeing this, it means Graham has done exactly what I feared he would do. It means he has chosen the money over you. She paused, taking a sip of water. I built this company with him, but I built the soul of it alone. And I know you, honey. I know you helped build the rest. You are the only one who understands the architecture because you are the only one who listened. On the screen, she leaned closer to the camera. I have installed a failsafe. Graham thinks he owns the platform. He doesn't. He is leasing it. I wrote a dependency into the core kernel. A dead man's switch. It checks the ownership registry of the trust every 24 hours. I held my breath. If the trust's shares are ever transferred or diluted without the digital signature of the trust's beneficiary, the system interprets it as a hostile takeover. It will initiate a lockdown protocol. The encryption keys for the entire database will rotate, and the new keys will be sent to only one location, the biometric profile associated with this root account. The screen went black. The silence in the hotel suite was absolute. Do you understand what she did? Damon asked, a tone of reverence in his voice. She turned the company into a bomb, I said, staring at the black screen. And she gave me the detonator. It is better than that, I corrected myself, my mind racing through the implications. If Graham tries to sell the core logic to Sovereign Apex, he has to transfer the title. The moment he does that, the dead man's switch triggers. The system locks down. The code becomes unreadable garbage. The company becomes worthless instantly. He can't sell it without destroying it, Owen said. And he doesn't know the switch exists. And even if he triggers it, I said, a slow smile spreading across my face. I am the only one who can unlock it. I am the only one with the biometric profile for the root account. I am not just the owner. Owen, I am the technical support. I went back to the logs, feeling a new surge of power. I wasn't just looking for crimes anymore. I was inspecting my weapon. As I scrolled through the system activity from the last 2 months, the time I was in the coma, I noticed an anomaly amid the sea of Mason's fraudulent commits and the automated server maintenance. There was a persistent, quiet signal. A user account. KM our night shift. Most users logged in, did their work, and logged out. But KM's night shift was different. This user had been accessing the system at 3 in the morning, every night. They weren't writing code. They were copying logs. They were archiving email threads that were later deleted by the admin. They were saving security footage. "Who is KM?" I asked, highlighting the username. "They have been shadowing Mason's activity for months. Look here. Mason deleted a safety report on the new server racks. But KM Night Shift restored a backup of it to a hidden folder 5 minutes later." KM, Owen mused. Kieran Mills? "The head of building security in Cleveland," Damon said, nodding. "Ex-cop. Honorable discharge. I did a background check on the key personnel. He has been with the company since before your mother died." "He is gathering evidence," I said. "He knew something was wrong. He has been building a case file from the inside, waiting for someone to listen." I opened the hidden folder KM our night shift had created. It was full of video files and text logs. It was a treasure trove of Graham and Mason's incompetence and malice, meticulously cataloged by a man who worked in the dark. "We have a friend on the inside," I said, looking up at Damon. "And he has the eyes and ears that we need." Damon pulled out his phone. "I will contact him. If he is willing to shadow a billionaire CEO for months, he is ready to join the fight." I closed the laptop, the glow of the screen fading from my face. My ribs ached. My head pounded. But for the first time since waking up, I didn't feel weak. I felt like the architect. "Graham wants to sell the company on Friday," I said to the dark room. "Let's see how he handles a system crash." Over the next 12 hours, the quiet luxury of the rehabilitation suite was dismantled. In its place, we built a command center that looked less like a hospital room and more like the headquarters of a coup d'etat. The expensive artwork on the walls was taken down and replaced with oversized whiteboards that Damon had procured from somewhere in the middle of the night. The beige wallpaper was soon covered in a chaotic yet precise mosaic of printed emails, bank transfer logs, architectural schematics, and photos of board members. Owen had turned the dining table into a legal library, stacking binders of case law and corporate charters high enough to block the view of the television. I sat in the center of it all, my wheelchair positioned like a captain's chair. The pain in my ribs was a dull, constant throb, but the adrenaline flooding my system was a potent anesthetic. Damon stood before the main whiteboard, a red marker in his hand. He was drawing a timeline that spanned 2 decades. "Look at the pattern, Nicole," he said, stepping back to let me see the whole picture. "It is not random cruelty. It is engineered." He pointed to a date 10 years ago, the month my mother died. Then he drew a line to a date 6 months later. "This is when Laura starts aggressively moving liquid cash into the trust. She knew she was dying, and she knew exactly who she was leaving behind." He drew another line, slashing forward 5 years. "This is when Evelyn enters the picture, and look at the correlation." He tapped a cluster of data points below the timeline. "The month Evelyn moves in is the exact same month your security clearance at Hudson Vertex was downgraded from level 4 to level 2. And it is the same month the first consulting fees started being paid to a shell company in the Cayman Islands controlled by Graham." She didn't just distract him, I realized, tracing the red line with my eyes. She monetized him. She taught him how to siphon money out of the company without alerting the shareholders. "Exactly," Owen said, looking up from a stack of depositions. "And to do that, they needed to marginalize the one person who would notice the discrepancies in the data. You." "I wasn't demoted because I was unlikable," I murmured, the realization cold and hard. "I was demoted because I was a witness." "And now we need a witness of our own," Damon said. He pulled out his phone and engaged the speaker. "I sent the encrypted signal to the number we found in the logs. He is expecting our call." The phone rang once, twice, then a voice answered. It was deep, gravelly, and sounded like it had been cured in cigarette smoke and late nights. "I wondered when someone would finally look at the logs," the voice said. No hello, no question of who it was. "Kieran Mills?" I asked. Ms. Hudson, the voice replied. There was a pause, heavy with unsaid things. I heard you were in a bad way. I am glad to hear a voice that sounds alive. I am alive, Kieran, I said, and I am looking at a file named Project Eclipse. I need to know why you built a shadow archive of my brother's career. I didn't do it for your brother, Kieran said, his tone shifting to something sharper. I was a cop for 20 years before I took this job. I know the difference between the guy who signs the check and the guy who actually does the work. I spent 5 years watching that building on the night shift. You were the only one there. Nicole, every single launch, every crisis. While the cleaners were vacuuming the executive suites, you were in the server room eating vending machine crackers. You saw me, I whispered. It was a strange sensation. For years, I felt invisible, but the man behind the security cameras had been watching the whole time. I saw everything, Kieran corrected. Check the upload I just sent to the secure drop, folder 3. I turned to my laptop. A new notification popped up on the secure server. I clicked on folder 3. It contained a split-screen video file. On the left side of the screen was CCTV footage from the Hudson Vertex server room. The timestamp was November 14th. 2 years ago, I was there, wrapped in a blanket, typing furiously on 3 different monitors. I looked exhausted. My hair messy. Dark circles under my eyes. I remembered that night. The database had corrupted 48 hours before the launch of our flagship logistics platform. I rebuilt the index by hand. I didn't sleep for 36 hours. On the right side of the screen was a social media video. Time-stamped the exact same weekend. It was Mason. He was in Aspen, Colorado. He was holding a glass of champagne, wearing expensive ski gear, laughing with a group of models. The caption on the post read, "Grinding all weekend to bring you the future. Hudson Vertex Visionary." I felt a surge of nausea. He wasn't even in the state. Keep watching, Kieran said over the phone. The video cut to a boardroom. Graham was there, shaking hands with 3 men in expensive gray suits. I didn't recognize them, but Damon did. He stepped closer to the screen, his eyes narrowing. That is the Sovereign Apex Acquisition Team, Damon said. This video is dated 6 months ago. Graham told the board he had never met them until last week. He has been selling the company out from under them for half a year, Owen said, scribbling furiously on a notepad. This is breach of fiduciary duty. This is fraud. There is something else, Kieran said. His voice dropped lower. Go to the audio file labeled Main Residence Library. I recorded this off the internal intercom system in the house 3 years ago. I wasn't supposed to be listening, but I had a hunch. I clicked the file. Static hissed, and then Evelyn's voice cut through, clear and imperious. Kieran, darling, the motion sensors in the East Wing study are too sensitive. They keep tripping when I am just reorganizing. I need you to disable the internal cameras for that room, just for a few days. Then Kieran's voice on the recording, polite but firm. Mrs. Hudson, that is where the master safe is located. Protocol requires 24-hour surveillance. Evelyn's voice turned icy. Graham and I are discussing the future of the estate. We require privacy. Do not make me ask my husband to fire you over a technicality. The recording ended. I looked at Owen, my mouth slightly open. She knew. She didn't find the trust, Owen said, his eyes wide. But she knew Laura had hidden something. She spent days tearing that room apart looking for it. That is why she wanted the cameras off. She was hunting for the money. She failed, I said, a grim satisfaction settling in my chest. Because Mom didn't hide the key in the room. She hid it with you. We have enough here to bury them, Damon said. But we have to be careful. If we release this now, Graham will claim the videos are doctored deepfakes. He will say it is a vindictive attack by a brain-damaged daughter. As if summoned by the mention of my condition, the landline in the suite rang. It was the only line connected to the outside world that wasn't encrypted. Damon answered it. He listened for 10 seconds, his face hardening into a mask of stone. He didn't say a word, just hung up. That was your contact at the Chicago hospital, Damon said, turning to me. Someone just tried to access your medical records remotely. They weren't looking for a recovery update. They were trying to flag specific scans from the night of the accident." "Why?" I asked. "They are looking for brain bleed patterns," Owen explained, his face pale. "Graham's lawyers want to construct a narrative. If they can find even a shadow of a neurological anomaly, they will blow it up. They will tell the court that your revenge is actually a symptom of frontal lobe damage, paranoia, aggression, delusion. They are going to paint you as crazy," Damon said bluntly. "When you walk onto that stage in New York, they won't argue about the money. They will look at the audience with sad eyes and say, 'Look at my poor daughter. She doesn't know what she is saying. The accident broke her mind.'" I looked at the wall. I looked at the timeline of betrayal, the videos of Mason taking credit for my blood and sweat, the audio of Evelyn trying to pick the lock of my inheritance. They had taken my childhood. They had taken my career. They had taken my name off my own work. And now, they wanted to take my sanity. They wanted to reduce my righteous anger to a medical symptom. I wheeled my chair over to the center of the room, right in front of the map of evidence. I looked at the picture of Graham, smiling his shark smile. "Let them try," I said. My voice was quiet, but it didn't shake. "They spent 20 years treating me like I was invisible. They trained me for this. They think they can call me a ghost? Fine." I turned to Damon and Owen. "Ghosts are terrifying because you can't touch them, but they can touch you. They want to say, 'I am not all here.' I will show them exactly how much of me is left. I am going to walk through their security, through their lies, and through their walls." I pointed to the stack of files regarding the board members. "Owen, get me the list of the independent directors, the ones Graham pushed aside. We are not going to sue Graham. We are going to orchestrate a mutiny." "And Kieran?" Damon asked. "Tell him to keep the night shift open," I said. "I need him to unlock the back door to the New York Conference Center. If I am going to crash this party, I am not walking in through the lobby." The war room buzzed with renewed energy. We weren't just planning a legal defense anymore. We were planning an assassination of character, a surgical strike on the reputation of the Hudson family, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't the one who was going to bleed. The summons did not come with a subpoena this time. It came in the form of a black Mercedes Maybach, idling outside the rehabilitation center, driven by a man I recognized as Graham's personal chauffeur. The text message that lit up my phone screen was a masterpiece of gaslighting. "Daddy just wants to hold you. Please come home. We need to talk about your future." It was the first time in 10 years he had referred to himself as Daddy. The word looked alien on the screen, a desperate plea from a man who had realized the locks on the kingdom had been changed while he slept. "He knows," Damon said, watching the car from the window of our suite. "The bank notifications for the trust transfer went out an hour ago. He knows the assets have moved." "He doesn't want to hug me," I said, buttoning my coat over the rigid plastic of my rib brace. "He wants to see if I am lucid enough to sign a reversal." "Do not sign anything," Owen warned, handing me a small, flat device. "And keep this running. In Illinois, we are a two-party consent state for recording, but there is an exception for recording evidence of a crime in progress. And what he is about to try to do is called extortion." The ride to the penthouse in downtown Cleveland was silent. I watched the city pass by, the gray slush on the sidewalks, the steel towers of industry. This was Graham's territory. For years, I had felt small in this city, crushed under the weight of the Hudson name. Today, I felt different. I wasn't the daughter returning home. I was the landlord coming to inspect a delinquent tenant. When the elevator doors opened directly into the penthouse foyer, the smell hit me first. Roast chicken and rosemary. It was a scent designed to trigger primal memories of safety and home. I stepped inside. The scene before me was so staged it belonged on a Broadway set. Graham was standing by the fireplace, holding a glass of water instead of his usual scotch. He was wearing a cashmere sweater, sleeves pushed up, looking approachable and weary, and in the open-plan kitchen, Evelyn, a woman who I had once seen fire a maid for loading the dishwasher incorrectly, was standing over a pot, stirring soup with a wooden spoon. She was wearing an apron. It was grotesque. "Nicole," Graham choked out. He set the water down and crossed the room with urgent strides. He stopped just short of touching me, his hands hovering in the air as if he were afraid I might break. "My God, you are so thin." 2 months of intravenous feeding will do that, I said. My voice was cool, devoid of the tremor he was probably hoping for. "We were so worried," Evelyn called out from the kitchen. Abandoning the soup prop, she rushed over, her face a mask of tragic concern. "The doctors told us there was no hope. Nicole, you have to understand. It was agony." "Is that why you stopped paying the bill?" I asked. I didn't raise my voice. I just let the question hang in the luxuriously conditioned air. "Because of the agony?" Graham flinched. It was microscopic, a tightening of the muscle in his jaw, but I caught it. "That was a misunderstanding," Graham said quickly, ushering me toward the living room seating area. "Sit down, sweetheart, please. The hospital administration. They were predatory. They were draining the accounts with experimental treatments that they claimed weren't working. I had to take a hard line to force them to give us better options." "By cutting off the funding entirely?" Owen asked. He had entered the room behind me, silent as a shadow. Graham's eyes snapped to Owen. For a second, the mask slipped, revealing pure, unadulterated hatred. Then, he smoothed it over. "Owen," Graham said, his voice tight, "I didn't realize you were bringing legal counsel to a family reunion." "I am not here as counsel," Owen said, taking a seat on the opposite sofa. "I am here as the trustee of the Hudson Legacy Trust, the entity that, as of this morning, holds the controlling interest in your company." The air left the room. Evelyn stopped acting. She slowly untied her apron and dropped it on the floor, the concerned mother persona evaporating to reveal the cold calculator underneath. "We saw the notification," Graham said. He sat down opposite me, leaning forward, elbows on his knees. He dropped the daddy act and switched to CEO negotiating a merger. "Nicole," he began, his voice lowering to a confidential pitch. "I know you are confused. You have been through a terrible trauma, brain injuries. They can make you paranoid. They can make you do impulsive things." "I am not impulsive, Graham," I said. "I am accurate." "Owen shouldn't have burdened you with this," Graham pressed on, ignoring me. $850 million. That is a terrifying amount of responsibility. The tax implications alone would crush you. The volatility of the market. It is too much pressure for someone in recovery." He looked at me with wide, pleading eyes. "I want to protect you from that. I want you to focus on getting well. You shouldn't be worrying about board meetings and stock splits." "So what do you suggest?" I asked, leaning back against the cushions. Graham reached under the coffee table and pulled out a leather folder. He slid it across the marble surface toward me. "A family management agreement," he said. "It is simple. You appoint me as the permanent steward of the trust. I handle the voting rights, the investments, the headaches. In exchange, the trust pays you a guaranteed stipend, $500,000 a year, tax-free. You can travel, you can buy a house in Tuscany, you can heal." I stared at the document. He wasn't just asking for the money. He was asking for the power. He needed my voting rights to sell the company to Sovereign Apex. 500,000, I repeated, in exchange for an asset worth $850 million. "It is liquid cash, Nicole," Evelyn interjected, sitting on the arm of Graham's chair. "You have never had money like that. Think of the freedom." "And if I say no?" Before Graham could answer, the elevator dinged again, the doors slid open, and Mason stumbled out. He looked terrible. His tie was loose, his shirt was untucked, and the smell of bourbon arrived 3 seconds before he did. He didn't see me at first. He just saw Graham. "They are stalling," Mason slurred, throwing his briefcase onto a chair. "Sovereign, the reps are asking about the shareholder structure. They saw the alert about the trust activation. Dad, if we don't close this deal by Friday, the shorts are going to eat us alive. We promised them the IP." "Mason," Graham barked, standing up. "Shut up." Mason blinked, Turning to look at the room, his eyes landed on me. He froze. "Nicole?" he whispered. Then he let out a short, hysterical laugh. "Oh, great! The vegetable is back." "Mason!" Evelyn hissed, rushing over to him, trying to physically steer him out of the room. She kicked his shin, hard, but Mason was too numb to feel it. "Don't kick me, Mother," Mason snapped, shoving her hand away. He looked at me with a mix of fear and resentment. "So, you are awake. Good for you. Are you going to sign the papers? Because if you don't release those shares, the sale price tanks. We are looking at 60 cents on the dollar if we can't deliver the clean title. That damn trust is blocking everything." I looked at Graham. His face had gone pale. The charade was over. Mason had just confirmed everything the logs had told us. "There is no stewardship," I said to Graham. "You are selling the company. You are selling my code. And you need my signature to do it." Graham slowly sat back down. The warmth was gone from his eyes. The daddy, who wanted to hug me, was dead. In his place sat a man looking at a rebellious employee. "It is a business decision, Nicole," Graham said coldly. "The market is shifting. We need to exit. Sovereign Apex is offering a buyout that secures this family for generations. Do you really want to be the reason we lose everything? Do you want to be the reason your brother goes to jail for insider trading because he leveraged positions he couldn't cover?" "That sounds like a Mason problem," I said. "Not a Nicole problem." Graham's face twisted. "You ungrateful little—" He stopped himself, taking a breath. "Sign the agreement. Nicole, sign it, or I will tie you up in court for 10 years. I will have every psychiatrist in the state testify that you are mentally unstable. I will freeze every cent of that trust until you are old and gray. You won't see a dime." I felt the recorder humming against my ribs. I reached into my bag, not for a pen, but for the copy of the trust document Owen had given me. Clause 7, Section C, I recited from memory. I didn't need to look at the paper. Any attempt by a guardian, family member, or interested party to use coercion, threats of litigation, or psychological manipulation to seize control of the trust assets shall be considered a hostile act. Upon evidence of such an act, the trustee is authorized to petition for an immediate freezing of the aggressor's personal assets to cover legal defense fees. I looked at Evelyn, then at Mason, and finally at Graham. "You just threatened to drag me through court to force a signature," I said. "You just admitted to a conspiracy to sell assets you don't own, and you did it in front of the trustee." Graham stood up. He loomed over me, his hands balling into fists. The veins in his neck were bulging. "You think you are smart?" he spat, his voice rising to a shout. "You are nothing. You are a glitch in the system. I built this family. I built this fortune. You are just a line item. Nicole, you are a line item worth $850 million on a balance sheet that just jumped off the page, and I will put you back in your place." The room rang with his shout. I sat perfectly still. My hand moved to my lap, confirming the recording light was still on. "Thank you," I said softly. "For what?" Graham snarled, breathing hard. "For admitting exactly what I am to you," I said. "A line item." I signaled to Owen. He stood up and offered me his arm. I didn't need it. I could walk, but I took it anyway. It was a gesture of alliance. "We are leaving," I said. "You walk out that door," Graham shouted after us, "and you are dead to this family." I paused at the elevator. I turned back to look at them one last time. Evelyn was pale, clutching her pearls. Mason was swaying, looking sick. Graham was red-faced, shaking with impotent rage. They looked like a painting of a kingdom that had already fallen. They just hadn't hit the ground yet. I was dead to this family the moment I stopped being profitable. "Graham," I said, "I am just returning the favor." The elevator doors slid shut, cutting off the sight of their panicked faces. As we descended to the lobby, I pulled the recorder out of my pocket and pressed stop. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from the sheer, icy finality of it. "Did we get it?" Owen asked. "Every word," I said. "He threatened me. He admitted the sale. He admitted the motive. I leaned my head back against the mirrored wall of the elevator. I felt lighter. The hope, that tiny, stupid, childish hope, that maybe, just maybe, my father actually loved me, was finally gone. It had been excised like a tumor. They didn't want me back, I whispered to the empty car. They just wanted the key to the vault. And now, Owen said as the doors opened to the cold Cleveland night, you are going to lock them out of it forever. The flight to New York was a masterclass in deception. We were not flying as Nicole Hudson and her legal team. We were listed on the manifest as analysts for the Aurora Horizon Group, a boutique European investment fund that Owen had ties to. It was a favor called in from an old friend of my mother, a cover story designed to get me into the National Tech Summit without alerting the wolves that the shepherd had returned. I sat by the window of the Gulf Stream, watching the clouds bruise purple as the sun began to set. On the tray table in front of me, my laptop was open, displaying the command console for the dead man's switch my mother had built. It was a terrifyingly simple piece of architecture. With a single execute command, I could freeze the entire operational capability of Hudson Vertex. I could lock every server, encrypt every database, and turn $1 billion company into a collection of expensive paperweights. I could do it now, I said, my finger hovering over the enter key. The temptation was a physical itch. I could lock them out before they even step on that stage. Mason wouldn't be able to pull up a single slide. Damon reached over and gently closed the laptop lid. If you do that, he said, his voice calm but firm, you play right into the narrative they are building. You become the vandal, the disgruntled daughter who broke her father's toys because she was cut out of the will. The shareholders will panic, the stock will plummet, and Graham will go on CNN and play the victim. He is right, Owen added from the seat across the aisle. He was reviewing the guest list for the summit, his glasses perched on the end of his nose. You cannot just stop the sale, Nicole. You have to discredit the seller. You have to let them stand on that stage, make their promises, and lie to the world, and then you have to be the truth that walks into the room. I knew they were right, but the patience required was agonizing. I was holding a nuclear launch code, but I had to wait until the enemy was in the blast radius. As we began our descent into Teterboro, Owen's phone pinged with an email notification. He frowned, tapping the screen, and his face went ashen. What is it? I asked. It is an anonymous tip, Owen said, his voice tight. Sent to the summit's organizing committee. Copied to the Hudson Vertex board secretary. It is an attachment. He turned the phone toward me. It was a scanned PDF. The header read, Psychiatric Evaluation. Nicole Hudson. The date was from 3 days ago, when I was still in the rehab facility. I read the summary paragraph. Patient exhibits severe paranoid delusions, dissociative identity traits, and aggressive tendencies stemming from frontal lobe trauma. Competency for financial or legal decision-making is rated at 0. Immediate custodial guardianship recommended. It was signed by a Dr. Arrington, a name I had never heard, with a signature that looked suspiciously like the one on my father's club membership renewals. They are seeding the ground, Damon said, reading over my shoulder. They are sending this to the organizers so that if you do show up and try to speak, security will treat you as a mental health risk, not a shareholder. They are not just calling me crazy, I said, staring at the lie. They are medicalizing my existence so they can legally sedate me. The plane wheels touched down with a jolt that felt like a gavel hitting a desk. The game had shifted. It wasn't just about money anymore. It was about defining reality. We took a private car from the airfield into Manhattan. The city was a grid of lights rising out of the darkness, indifferent and massive. I sat in the back of the black sedan, watching the traffic on the bridge. We were crossing the Triborough, the steel girders flashing by like the bars of a cage. Damon was in the front passenger seat, constantly checking the mirrors. He had been on edge since we landed. We have a tail, Damon said quietly. I turned to look out the rear window. The traffic was dense, a river of headlights. Where? Black SUV, 2 cars back, It has been matching our lane changes since we left the airport exit. Maybe it is just traffic, Owen said, though he clutched his briefcase tighter. It is New York. Everyone drives aggressively. Not like this, Damon said. As if on cue, the black SUV surged forward. It didn't signal. It just accelerated into the narrow gap between us and the concrete barrier of the bridge. Hang on, the driver shouted, wrenching the wheel to the left. The SUV slammed into our rear quarter panel. The sound of metal grinding on metal was a high-pitched scream. Our car fishtailed, sliding dangerously close to the center divider. My head snapped back against the headrest. The breath knocked out of me. They are trying to run us off, Damon yelled. Drive! Get us off the bridge! The SUV came again, harder this time. It wasn't trying to pass. It was trying to pit us, to spin us into the oncoming traffic. I looked out the window and saw the other driver for a split second, a silhouette in a baseball cap, faceless and determined. Our driver was a professional. He slammed on the brakes, letting the SUV shoot past us, then gunned the engine, swerving behind a delivery truck to use it as a shield. The SUV screeched, realized it had missed its shot, and sped away into the labyrinth of Queens, disappearing into the night. I sat trembling in the dark, my heart hammering against my bruised ribs. This wasn't a legal maneuver. This was a hit. Are you hurt? Owen asked, his voice shaking. I am fine, I managed to say. Get Kieran, now. Damon was already dialing. He put the phone on speaker. Kieran, Damon barked. We just got rammed on the Triborough Bridge. Black SUV. Late model. No plates visible on the rear. Give me 2 minutes. Kieran's voice crackled over the line. I am tapping into the company vehicle transponders. The 2 minutes felt like 2 hours. We drove in silence, the driver taking a convoluted route through side streets to shake any other pursuers. Got it, Kieran said. Company vehicle 419. It is logged out to the executive pool, but the GPS history shows it left the Hudson Vertex garage in Cleveland 10 hours ago and drove straight to New York. Who signed it out? I asked. The log says maintenance, Kieran said, but I pulled the gate footage. The driver isn't maintenance. It is Mason. He's wearing a baseball cap, but I would recognize that chin anywhere. My brother just tried to kill me, I said. The words tasted like copper. He tried to stop you, Damon corrected. Killing you would just be a bonus for them. They are desperate. Nicole, people don't try to run cars off bridges unless they know they have already lost the argument. We arrived at the hotel through the service entrance. It was a high-security procedure usually reserved for heads of state, but tonight, I felt like a fugitive. The suite was on the 40th floor, overlooking the jagged skyline of Midtown. The view was breathtaking, a billion lights shining in the dark, but all I could see was the reflection of my own face in the glass, pale, tired, but hard. I thought about the fake psychiatric report. I thought about the SUV slamming into us. I thought about Graham's fake hug and Evelyn's fake soup. They had thrown everything at me: abandonment, poverty, legal erasure, and now, physical violence. They were terrified. They were terrified of the one thing they couldn't buy: bribe or bully, the truth. I stood by the window, my hand resting on the cold glass. My mother's voice echoed in my head, a memory from a time when she was still healthy enough to brush my hair. Silence is not surrender, Nicole. Silence is the time you use to sharpen the blade. I had been silent for 2 months in a coma. I had been silent for 10 years in the basement of that company. I had let them talk, let them boast, let them steal. And in that silence, I had become something they weren't ready for. I turned away from the window. Owen and Damon were setting up for the next day, printing out the final sequence of evidence. Change of plan, I said. They both looked up. We are not just going to block the sale, I said. I want everything. I want the logs of Mason's fake commits. I want the video of Evelyn trying to break into the safe. I want the audio of Graham threatening me. I want the GPS data of Mason's car on the bridge tonight. You want to air all the dirty laundry? Owen asked. It will tank the stock price, Nicole, you will be inheriting a burning building. I don't care about the stock price, I said. I can rebuild the company. I built it the first time, but I cannot rebuild the truth if I let them walk away with a shred of dignity. I walked over to the table where my clothes for tomorrow were laid out. It wasn't a dress. It was a suit. Sharp, tailored, severe, black as a funeral. Tomorrow, I said, picking up the titanium keycard my mother had left me. We are going to show them exactly what happens when you underestimate the quiet one. I looked at Damon. Is the backdoor access ready? Kieran has disabled the alarm on the stage entrance, Damon said. We walk in right as Graham starts his keynote. Good, I said. I went to the mirror and looked at myself. The fear was gone. The hesitation was gone. The daughter who wanted her father's approval was gone. Owen, I said, checking the time. It was 1 a.m. Reply to that anonymous email with the psychiatric report. Reply? Owen asked. What do you want me to say? Just tell them we received it, I said, a cold smile touching my lips. And tell them that tomorrow, we will see who is really unfit to lead. The grand ballroom of the convention center was a cavern of manufactured enthusiasm. The air conditioning was set to a brisk 68 degrees, keeping the scent of expensive cologne and anticipation crisp in the air. Over 2,000 people packed the tiered seating, investors, tech journalists, industry rivals, all eyes fixed on the massive LED screen spanning the width of the stage. The screen displayed a sleek, rotating graphic of the Hudson Vertex logo, dissolving into the word tomorrow. My father, Graham Hudson, stood at the podium. He was in his element. The stage lights caught the silver in his hair, making him look distinguished, trustworthy, the very image of American corporate stability. He wasn't just a CEO, he was a preacher, and the congregation was eating out of his hand. Innovation is not just about code, Graham boomed. His voice resonated through the theater-quality sound system. It is about lineage. It is about passing the torch to the next generation of visionaries who see what we cannot. He gestured grandly to his right. Mason stood there, looking uncomfortable in a suit that cost more than my first car. He was trying to smile, but his eyes were darting around the room, nervous sweat already glistening on his forehead. Ladies and gentlemen, Graham continued, placing a heavy hand on Mason's shoulder, the architect of our new dawn, the brain behind the Vertex Vision platform, my son, Mason Hudson. Applause erupted. It was polite, rhythmic, and completely unearned. Mason stepped forward to accept the praise for code he couldn't even read, let alone write. I was standing in the wings, hidden by the heavy velvet curtains. My leg throbbed where the cane dug into my hip, and my ribs felt like they were encased in iron, but my pulse was steady. I looked at Owen, who gave me a grim nod. Damon was already positioned at the sound engineer's console, a place he had secured thanks to Kieran's security bypass codes. Now, I whispered to myself. As the applause began to fade and the lights dimmed for a tribute video, a single spotlight cut through the darkness. It wasn't part of the program. It hit the stage left entrance, illuminating the empty floor. Then, I stepped into the light. The silence that fell over the room was instant and absolute. It wasn't the respectful silence of a pause. It was the confused, suffocating silence of a disruption. I walked slowly. I didn't have a choice. I relied heavily on the silver-handled cane I had bought that morning. Click, step, drag, click, step, drag. The sound was amplified by the acoustics of the room, a rhythmic intrusion into their perfect ceremony. I saw Graham's face on the giant monitors. His smile froze, then fractured. For a second, he looked like he had seen a ghost. Then, the politician took over. "Nicole?" he breathed into the microphone, his voice trembling with a performance of shock and relief. He stepped away from the podium, arms wide, rushing toward me. "My God! Nicole! You made it!" He was trying to intercept me. He wanted to wrap me in a hug, bury my face in his shoulder so I couldn't speak, and whisper threats in my ear while the audience cooed at the touching family reunion. When he got within 2 feet, I stopped. I didn't flinch. I just looked at him with eyes as cold as the morgue he had left me in. "Do not touch me," I said. I wasn't wearing a microphone yet, but the room was so quiet that my voice carried to the front rows. Graham halted, his hands hovering awkwardly in the air. He chuckled nervously, playing to the crowd. "She is still recovering," he said to the audience, turning his back to me to block their view. "My daughter. She is a fighter, so emotional after the accident." He tried to signal security with his eyes, a desperate glance toward the wings, but the security guards weren't moving. Kieran had told them to stand down. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a wireless microphone that Damon had left on a prop table for me. I switched it on. The feedback whine made everyone wince. "I am not emotional, Graham," I said, my voice booming through the speakers, drowning him out. "I am expensive." The crowd murmured. Graham's smile vanished. "Nicole," he hissed, off mic, "get off this stage, or I will have you committed before you reach the exit." I ignored him. I turned to the audience. I saw the confused faces of the board members in the front row. I saw Evelyn, pale as a sheet, gripping her purse. "My father just told you that this company is about lineage," I said. "He told you it is about family, but I want to show you exactly how the Hudson family treats its own when the profit margins dip." I signaled to the control booth. On the massive LED screen behind us, the glossy logo of Hudson Vertex disappeared. In its place, a high-resolution scan of a crumpled hospital note appeared. It was 50 feet tall. The jagged handwriting was unmistakable. "We stopped paying. Good luck." The gasp from the audience was audible. It rippled through the room like a wave. "Lies!" Graham shouted, rushing back to the podium to grab his mic. "This is a fabrication. She is delusional." He looked out at the crowd, sweating profusely now. "Please, forgive her. My daughter suffered severe frontal lobe trauma in the crash. She doesn't know what she is saying. We have been trying to protect her privacy. But—" He pulled a document from his inside jacket pocket and waved it in the air. "I have the medical reports right here," Graham yelled. "She is diagnosed with paranoid psychosis. She thinks we are enemies. She is not competent to be here." The audience swayed. I could see it. The seed of doubt was planted. A father waving a medical report was a powerful image. "Psychosis," I repeated. "That is a big word, Graham." I looked up at the control booth again. "Play it." The sound system crackled, and then a voice filled the room. It wasn't mine. It was Evelyn's. It was the recording Kieran had sent. Crystal clear, intimate, and damning. "Dr. Arrington, surely there is some flexibility in the diagnosis." Evelyn's voice purred from the speakers. "If the report mentions cognitive decline, it helps with the insurance. But if you could adjust the language? Add some phrases about delusion? We need to make sure the guardianship is uncontested. Graham is willing to make a significant donation to the hospital wing." Then, the doctor's hesitant voice. "Mrs. Hudson, you are asking me to fabricate a psychiatric condition." Evelyn's reply was sharp as glass. "I am asking you to be a team player. Do you want the funding for your research or not?" The recording cut. Evelyn, sitting in the front row, looked like she had been slapped. She shrank into her seat, shielding her face from the dozens of camera phones that had suddenly turned toward her. Graham stood frozen at the podium. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. The caring father mask had slipped, revealing the monster underneath. "I am not crazy, Graham," I said, stepping closer to him, the cane clicking rhythmically. "And I am not incompetent. Which brings us to the second lie you told today." I pointed at Mason. "You introduced him as the architect." "He is," Graham shouted, his voice cracking. "He leads the division." "Damon," I commanded. The screen changed again. This time, it split into two halves. On the left was a scrolling log of complex code commits, the DNA of the Vertex Vision platform. The timestamp was November 14th. The user ID was NHDevC01. On the right was a social media video. It showed Mason doing a keg stand at a fraternity alumni party. The timestamp was the exact same hour. On the left, I narrated, is the core kernel being written. On the right is the supposed architect celebrating a touchdown. "This proves nothing," Mason yelled, finally stepping up, though he looked like he was about to vomit. I managed the team. I delegated." "You didn't delegate," I said. "You copy-pasted. The system logs show that 90% of the code base was written by a user with root access. Me. You didn't build the future. Mason, you just put your name on my homework." The room was in chaos now. Journalists were shouting questions. Shareholders were standing up. The stock price was likely free-falling in real time. Graham slammed his hand on the podium. The sound echoed like a gunshot. "Enough!" he roared. "Security! Remove her!" He turned to the board members in the front row, his eyes wild. "This is a hostile act. She is trying to tank the company. I am her legal guardian. As of this morning, I have filed for emergency conservatorship. Anything she says is legally void. I control her assets. I control her vote." "Actually," a calm voice spoke from the stage stairs. Owen walked up. He didn't need a microphone. He held a blue-backed legal folder high in the air. "Mr. Hudson filed a petition," Owen announced to the room, "but a petition is not a judgment." He walked over to me and handed me the folder. "This," Owen said, turning to the audience, "is a certified copy of the Hudson Legacy Trust, validated by the New York State Supreme Court at 9 o'clock this morning." I took the folder. I felt the weight of it. It was heavier than the cane. It was the hammer. "The trust stipulates," I said, reading the clause that Graham had dreaded, "that in the event of financial abandonment by the primary guardian, the trust vests immediately and fully in the beneficiary." I looked Graham dead in the eye. "You stopped paying, Graham. You abandoned me, and in doing so, you triggered the clause." I turned to the stunned board of directors. "I am the majority shareholder of the Hudson Legacy Trust," I announced, "and the trust owns 51% of the voting stock of this company. Graham Hudson does not speak for this company. I do." The room erupted. It wasn't just noise. It was pandemonium. Flashbulbs went off like strobe lights. Graham looked at the board members. He looked at the investors. He saw the shift. They weren't looking at him with reverence anymore. They were looking at him like a liability. "This is illegal," Graham sputtered, but his voice was weak. "She stole the files. She—" A gray-haired man in the front row stood up. It was Arthur Sterling, the longest-serving independent director. He looked at Graham with profound disappointment, then looked at me. "Mr. Hudson," Sterling said, his voice cutting through the noise, "I think we need to adjourn." "No," Graham shouted. "We are launching." "We are adjourning," Sterling repeated, his tone leaving no room for argument. "The board requires an emergency executive session, immediately, in the private conference room." He looked at me. "Ms. Hudson, I suggest you and your counsel join us." I nodded. "I will be there," I said. Graham glared at me with pure, unadulterated venom. "You haven't won," he whispered as he passed me, leaning in so only I could hear. "You have just burned down your own inheritance." "I didn't burn it down, Dad," I whispered back, using the word like a knife. "I just turned on the lights." I watched him storm off the stage, trailed by a terrified Mason and a weeping Evelyn. The audience watched them go, witnessing the fall of a dynasty in real time. I adjusted my grip on the cane. My ribs were screaming. My leg was on fire. But I had never stood taller. I turned to Owen and Damon. "Ready for the main event?" I asked. Damon smiled, closing the laptop. "They are on the ropes. Let's go finish it." The executive boardroom on the 45th floor was a stark contrast to the chaotic theater of the ballroom below. Downstairs, the press was likely already dissecting the corpse of Hudson Vertex's reputation. Up here, the air was still and smelled of stale coffee and fear. The room was soundproofed, windowless, and cold. There were no cameras, no reporters, just a long mahogany table, 12 leather chairs, and the raw, unvarnished weight of power. I sat at the far end of the table. opposite Graham. Owen was to my right, Damon to my left. The independent board members filled the sides, their faces unreadable masks of corporate calculation. They were looking at me not as a person, but as a variable in a risk assessment equation. Graham broke the silence. He had composed himself during the elevator ride up. The panic was gone, replaced by the smooth, patronizing tone of a man used to controlling the narrative. "I apologize for the theatrics downstairs," Graham said, folding his hands on the table. He didn't look at me. He addressed Arthur Sterling and the other directors. "It is heartbreaking to see, truly, as I tried to explain. Nicole is suffering from significant neurological trauma. The stress of the accident, combined with the coma, has resulted in confusion." He tapped the psychiatric report that was still sitting in front of him. "We have a medical duty here. Handing the reins of a billion-dollar corporation to a young woman who is currently battling severe paranoid delusions is not just irresponsible, it is corporate suicide. She is a risk to the company, and frankly, she is a risk to herself." He sounded so reasonable, so paternal. If I hadn't known he tried to run my car off a bridge 12 hours ago, I might have believed him. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't object. I simply opened my laptop and connected it to the room's main projector. "Risk is a matter of timing, Graham," I said. "Let us look at yours." I hit a key. A document appeared on the wall screen. It was an email thread between Graham and his personal attorney, time-stamped 3 days before the petition for my incapacity was filed. "Read the subject line," I said. The text was large enough for everyone to see. Subject: Acceleration of incapacity filing. Sovereign apex deadline. The body of the email, I continued, reading aloud, says, "We need the court order by Friday. If she wakes up before the deal closes, the IP transfer gets messy. Can we expedite the medical sign-off?" Graham stiffened. "That is privileged attorney-client communication. Not when it is stored on a company server that you use to facilitate fraud." Damon interjected smoothly. "That pierces the privilege." I clicked to the next slide. It was a bank transaction log. "You claim you stopped paying my medical bills because the hospital was predatory," I said. "But look at the date. You signed the order to cease payment 72 hours before you filed the petition to the court claiming I was abandoned. You didn't stop paying because you were worried about the cost. You stopped paying to create a paper trail of abandonment so you could claim guardianship by default." "I was managing the estate," Graham snapped, his facade cracking. "Cash flow was tight." "Cash flow?" Owen asked. He stood up, placing the certified copy of the trust in the center of the table. "You were about to sell the core technology for $400 million. There was no cash flow problem. There was a greed problem." Owen looked at the board members. "This is the Hudson Legacy Trust. It was created by Laura Hudson with a single, specific trigger. If the legal guardian abandons financial responsibility for the beneficiary while they are medically incapacitated, the trust activates." He held up the scan of the note Graham had left me. "We stopped paying. Good luck." "This note," Owen said, "has been accepted by the New York State Supreme Court as a formal declaration of abandonment. It is a confession, signed and dated. By trying to save a few $1,000s on his daughter's life support, Mr. Hudson inadvertently triggered the transfer of assets he has spent 10 years trying to steal. That trust is a relic." Graham's lawyer, a sweating man named Mr. Finch, spoke up for the first time. "It was drafted a decade ago. It is vague. And frankly, the assets in question are marital property. Laura Hudson could not unilaterally sequester family funds into a private trust without Mr. Hudson's consent. We will contest this in probate for years." "You can try," Owen countered, his voice turning icy. "But these were not marital assets. The initial funding came from Laura's patent royalties earned before the marriage. It is separate property. And the growth? That came from investments she made independently." "Investments?" Graham scoffed. "Laura didn't know how to invest. She was an artist." "She was a visionary," Mrs. Whitaker spoke up. The room turned to her. Helen Whitaker was the most senior member of the board. a woman known for her silence and her ruthlessness. She was looking at Graham with an expression of profound distaste. "Laura came to see me," Mrs. Whitaker said, her voice quiet but distinct. "6 months before she passed, she told me she was setting up a failsafe. She said, 'Helen, Graham loves the company, but he loves the lifestyle more. If I die, he will strip mine this place to feed his ego. I need to lock the foundation so he cannot sell the bricks.'" Mrs. Whitaker turned to me. I didn't know what she meant by locking the foundation until today, but I see it now. Graham looked like he had been punched. "Helen, you cannot believe this. This is a coup." "It is not a coup," Damon said, stepping forward. "It is a rescue operation." Damon connected his tablet to the screen. The financial logs vanished, replaced by a complex schematic of the Hudson Vertex network architecture. "We need to discuss the technical reality," Damon said. "Mr. Hudson intends to sell the core logic source code to Sovereign Apex. He thinks he has the right to do so." Damon pointed to a red block in the center of the diagram. "He is wrong. Laura Hudson embedded a ownership dependency in the kernel. We call it a dead man's switch." The board members leaned in. They understood technology. They understood leverage. If the trust shares are transferred to an external entity like Sovereign Apex without the digital signature of the beneficiary, Damon explained, the system interprets it as a hostile breach. It initiates a scorched earth protocol. The encryption keys rotate, the data locks down, the platform becomes a brick. "He is bluffing," Graham spat. "My team has audited that code a dozen times." "Your team checks for bugs," I said. "They don't check for ghosts. Mom wrote that code in assembly language. It is buried so deep in the root directory that your architect Mason wouldn't find it if he had a map and a flashlight." I looked directly at Arthur Sterling. "If you allow Graham to proceed with this sale, or if you keep him as CEO, the system will lock. I am the only person with the biometric key to override it. If you side with him, you are voting to bankrupt this company by close of business today." The threat hung in the air. It was absolute. I wasn't asking for permission. I was telling them that I held the detonator. Graham's lawyer tried one last desperate Hail Mary. "This is extortion. She is holding the company hostage. The board cannot negotiate with terrorists." "We are not terrorists," Owen said calmly. "We are the owners." He tapped the keyboard one last time. The screen changed to a final summary. It was a balance sheet of the Hudson Legacy Trust. At the bottom, in bold black text, was the number. $850,000. The room went silent. The number was undeniable. It wasn't just a fortune. It was a gravity well. It represented 51% of the voting rights. It represented control. "The math does not lie," Owen said. "Nicole Hudson is not just a claimant. She is the majority shareholder. You are not deciding whether to give her power. You are deciding whether to acknowledge the power she already has." Arthur Sterling took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. He looked at the psychiatric report Graham had waved, then at the email proving Graham's conspiracy, then at the number on the screen. "We have a fiduciary duty to the shareholders," Sterling said slowly. "Mr. Hudson, the evidence suggests that your interests and the company's interests have diverged." "Diverged?" Graham stood up, his chair scraping violently against the floor. "I built this. I am Hudson Vertex." "No, Graham," Mrs. Whitaker said softly. "You are just the manager, and your contract is up." Sterling looked around the table. "I call for a motion. Motion to recognize the validity of the Hudson Legacy Trust, to seat Nicole Hudson as the interim chairwoman, and to immediately suspend Graham Hudson pending an internal investigation into financial misconduct and breach of duty." "Seconded," Mrs. Whitaker said immediately. "All in favor?" Sterling asked. The hands went up, one by one, slow, deliberate, and silent. Mrs. Whitaker, Sterling, the representative from the pension fund, the tech venture guy, even the board members Graham had appointed raised their hands, reading the room and realizing that loyalty to a sinking ship was bad business. It was unanimous. Graham stood there, staring at the forest of hands raised against him. His face went slack. The rage drained away, leaving only the hollow shell of a man who had spent his life chasing a number, only to be crushed by a bigger one. His phone buzzed on the table. It buzzed again, and again. The screen lit up with Evelyn's name. He stared at it, but he didn't answer. He couldn't. He had no answers left. I sat straight in my wheelchair, my back not touching the leather. My ribs ached, but the pain felt distant, like a memory. I looked at my father across the long expanse of the table. He looked small. "The motion carries," Sterling said. "Mr. Hudson, please hand over your security credentials. Security will escort you to your office to collect personal effects only." Graham looked at me. There was no hate left in his eyes, just a bewildered confusion, as if he still couldn't understand how the furniture had come alive and attacked him. "You are making a mistake," he whispered. It wasn't a threat. It was a plea. "The mistake was thinking you could erase me," I said. I turned to the board. "Let's get to work. We have a company to save." For the first time in my life, nobody looked at Graham to see if it was okay to listen to me. They were already opening their notebooks, waiting for my command. The silence in the room wasn't oppressive anymore. It was the silence of a new beginning. The vote was not a shout. It was a murmur. But in that acoustically sealed boardroom, the collective "I" of the directors sounded like a guillotine blade dropping into its block. "The motion carries," Arthur Sterling announced, his voice devoid of emotion. "The board formally recognizes Nicole Hudson as the primary beneficiary of the Hudson Legacy Trust and, by extension, the controlling shareholder of Hudson Vertex. Graham Hudson is hereby removed as CEO, effective immediately." For 3 seconds, Graham sat frozen. The reality of the moment seemed to physically strike him, pushing him back into his leather chair. Then, the explosion came. He didn't stand up with dignity. He surged to his feet, slamming his palms against the mahogany table so hard that the water glasses rattled. "You cannot do this to me!" he screamed, his face flushing a dangerous shade of crimson. The polished, composed executive who had charmed Wall Street for 20 years evaporated. In his place was a desperate, cornered man losing his grip on the only thing he had ever loved: power. "I built this company," Graham roared, pointing a trembling finger at the board members. "I made you all rich, and this is how you repay me? By handing my life's work over to a mental patient?" He spun toward me, his eyes wild. "I will sue every single one of you. I will tie this company up in litigation until the stock is worth less than the paper it is printed on. I will go to the press right now. I will tell them you are an ungrateful, unstable daughter who stole her father's legacy while he was trying to save her life." "Save my life?" I asked quietly. "You tried to unplug it." Graham ignored me, reaching for his phone. "I am calling CNN. I am calling the Journal. I will burn your reputation to the ground. Nicole, by tomorrow morning, you will be the most hated woman in America." I looked at him with a strange sense of detachment. He sounded like a ghost rattling chains that had already been cut. "Go ahead and call them, Graham," I said. "But you might want to check your access privileges first." I typed a final sequence into my laptop. It wasn't a complex code. It was a simple administrative command that I had queued up 10 minutes ago, waiting for the vote. Execute. On the main screen behind me, a notification popped up in bright red letters. User, G. Hudson. Status, revoked. Biometric ID, deleted. Graham's phone buzzed, then it went black. He tapped the screen furiously. Nothing. "What did you do?" he gasped. "I just revoked your digital identity," I said calmly. "Your company email is deactivated. Your keycard will not open the elevator. Your access to the corporate bank accounts is frozen. And your phone? It is company property. Graham, I just bricked it remotely." I closed my laptop. "I didn't destroy the company. I just pulled the plug on your power." Graham stared at his dead phone, then at me. His hands started to shake uncontrollably. He looked around the room for an ally, but the board members were all looking down at their notes or checking their watches. He was alone. "This isn't over," he whispered. But the fire was gone. He sounded like a man who knew he was drowning. Owen stood up and walked over to Graham. He placed a single sheet of paper on the table. "It can be over, Graham," Owen said. "Right now." Graham looked at the paper. "What is this?" "Your resignation," Owen said. "Voluntary, effective immediately, citing health reasons and a desire to spend more time with your family." Owen leaned in closer. "Here is the deal. You sign this. You step down from the board, and you agree to never interfere with Nicole's management of the assets again. In exchange, the trust will grant you a yearly stipend. It is modest, but enough to keep you comfortable in a small condo in Florida. No jets, no penthouses, just a quiet retirement." "And if I don't sign?" Graham asked, his voice barely audible. "Then we file the countersuit," Owen said, his tone hardening. "We sue you for breach of fiduciary duty. We sue you for abuse of guardianship. We release the full unedited logs of your fraud to the SEC. We don't just take your job, Graham, we take your freedom. You will spend the rest of your life in federal prison." Graham looked at the paper. He looked at the stipend amount. It was a fraction of what he used to spend on wine in a month. "A condo?" he muttered, tears of humiliation welling in his eyes. "Take the pen, Graham," Mrs. Whitaker said from across the table. "It is more than you deserve." Before Graham could move, a sudden movement to my right caught my eye. Mason, my brother, who had been sitting in stunned silence, suddenly scrambled out of his chair. He didn't run to Graham. He ran to me. He dropped to his knees right beside my wheelchair. It was a pathetic, theatrical gesture that made my stomach turn. He grabbed the armrest of my chair, tears streaming down his face. "Nicole," he sobbed. "Nikki, please, you have to understand. He made me do it." He pointed a shaking hand at Graham. "He pressured me. I didn't want to take credit for your work. I told him it was wrong. But he said we had to present a united front for the investors. I was just trying to be a good son." "Get up, Mason," I said, looking down at him. "You are embarrassing yourself." "I never wanted to hurt you," Mason pleaded, ignoring me. "When you were in the hospital, I visited. I checked on you. I love you, sis. We are family. Don't cut me out. I can help you run the company. I know the investors. We can be a team. Just like when we were kids." I looked at Damon. Damon didn't say a word. He just tapped his tablet and swiped a single image onto the main screen. It was an email. From Mason to the managing partner at Sovereign Apex. Dated 4 days ago. "Read it, Mason," Damon said. The text was magnified on the wall. Subject: The Nicole Problem. From Mason Hudson. Body: Don't worry about my sister. She is a vegetable. Even if she wakes up, she is legally incompetent. She is just an $850 million liquidity exit strategy. Once we get the guardianship, I will sign the IP over. She is just the golden goose, and we are about to cook her." The room went dead silent. Mason stopped crying instantly. He stared at the screen, his mouth open. The loving brother act dissolved into the reality of his own cruelty. "A liquidity exit strategy," I repeated the words slowly. "That is what I was to you? Not a sister, not a human being, just an animal to be slaughtered for cash." Mason slowly stood up, backing away from me, his face pale as ash. That was just business talk," he stammered. "I was just trying to close the deal." "And now I am closing mine," I said. I turned to Arthur Sterling. "I accept the nomination for chairwoman of the board and director of systems architecture, but I have one condition regarding personnel." "Name it," Sterling said. "Graham is out," I said. "But Mason stays." Mason's eyes lit up with a flicker of hope. "Thank you, Nicole. I promise. I will—" "You stay," I interrupted, my voice cutting him off. "As a junior data analyst, level 1. Mason blinked. "What?" "You will report to the basement," I said. "The same windowless room you put me in for 10 years. You will report to Sarah Jenkins, the head of quality assurance, the woman you yelled at last month for bothering you with details. You will check code for bugs. You will work night shifts, and you will do it for $45,000 a year." "You can't be serious," Mason whispered. "I am the chief strategy officer." "Not anymore," I said. "If you want a paycheck, you earn it. If you quit, I will ensure every tech company in the world sees that email on the screen. You will never work in this industry again." I looked at him. "Do we have a deal?" Mason looked at the floor. He looked at his expensive shoes. He realized he had nowhere to go. "Yes," he whispered. "Good," I said. "Orientation starts at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning. Don't be late." Graham had signed the paper. He slid it across the table to Owen, his hand shaking. He stood up, looking smaller than I had ever seen him. He was no longer the titan of industry. He was just an old man in a suit that no longer fit the occasion. "Security?" I called out. Kieran Mills walked in. He wasn't wearing his security guard uniform. He was wearing a suit. I had appointed him head of corporate security 10 minutes ago. "Escort Mr. Hudson to the exit," I said. Graham walked toward the door. He stopped as he passed my chair. He paused, looking down at me. For a second, I thought he might scream again, but he just looked confused. "What do you want from me, Nicole?" he asked. His voice was cracked. "I gave you the company. I gave you the money. I gave you everything. What more do you want?" He was still trying to negotiate. He still thought this was a transaction where he could offer something to balance the scales. I looked up at him. I didn't feel anger anymore. I didn't feel hate. I felt a profound, heavy relief. "I don't want anything from you, Graham," I said softly. "I don't want your approval. I don't want your love. I don't even want your apology." I leaned back in my chair. "That is what you can't accept. You can't handle the fact that I don't need you, not for money, not for survival, not for anything." I gestured to the door. "Goodbye?" Graham stared at me for a long moment, searching for a connection that had been severed years ago. He found nothing. He turned and walked out, Kieran trailing him like a shadow. The door clicked shut, sealing the tomb of his era. 30 minutes later, I faced the press. The lobby of the convention center was a zoo. Cameras flashed in a blinding strobe. Reporters shouted questions about the coup, about Graham's mental state, about the future of the stock. I sat at the podium, the microphone cool against my hand. I didn't talk about revenge. I didn't talk about the betrayal. "Hudson Vertex is entering a new chapter," I said to the sea of lenses. "But today isn't about new management. It is about honoring the original architect." I looked into the camera, imagining my mother watching from somewhere. "This company was built on the brilliance of Laura Hudson," I said. "She designed the systems that power your world, and she designed the protections that saved this company from greed. We are going back to her principles: innovation without exploitation, growth without erasing the people who build it." I took a breath. "My name is Nicole Hudson, and I am here to work." That night, the hotel room was quiet. The war room had been dismantled. Owen and Damon had gone to celebrate with a quiet drink, but I wanted to be alone. I wheeled myself to the window. New York City lay spread out before me, a grid of gold and diamond lights. It was beautiful, and for the first time, it didn't feel like a cage. I opened my laptop one last time. I found the file in the hidden folder. For Nicole Final, MP4, I clicked play. My mother filled the screen. She was sitting in the garden of our old house, the sun catching the gray in her hair. She looked healthy in this one, happy. "Hey, baby," she said, her smile crinkling the corners of her eyes. "If you are watching this one, it means you did it. It means you survived. Not just the accident, or whatever catastrophe Graham threw at you. It means you survived the erasure." She leaned closer to the camera. "I know you are probably feeling a lot of things right now. Anger, sadness, maybe a little bit of emptiness because the fight is over." She paused, as if she could see me sitting there in the dark. "Don't let the anger eat you, Nicole. You won. You took back your life. Now, The real work starts." Her voice dropped to a whisper, fierce and loving. "From this moment on, you don't live to prove them wrong. You don't live to punish them. You live as if you never needed them at all. That is the only revenge that lasts. Be happy. Nicole, be free." The screen went black. I sat there for a long time, watching the reflection of the city lights in the dark glass. I touched the screen where her face had been. I thought about Graham, sitting in his empty condo in Florida, checking a bank account that would never grow again. I thought about Mason, scanning code in the basement, answering to a boss who knew exactly who he was. They were trapped in their own greed, living in the ruins of the expectations they had built. I turned my wheelchair away from the window. I didn't need to run them off a bridge. I didn't need to lock them in a cell. I had done something far more permanent. I had taken away their relevance. I was the owner of $850 million. I was the chairwoman of the board. But more importantly, I was Nicole Hudson. And for the first time in my life, I belonged entirely to myself. I closed the laptop. The story of their betrayal was over. My life was just beginning. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from today. Drop a comment below with your country or city, and let's share our thoughts on Nicole's journey. If you enjoyed seeing justice served cold, please subscribe to the Lila Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and hit that hype button so more people can hear this story. See you in the next one.